We were talking about odium fidei, and today about odium justitiae. We see how these two dimensions are crossing each other, are interdependent. And this has been reiterated many times through the general congregations, and Pope Francis is particularly sensitive to this issue. Also with regard to the Synod of Amazon, I mentioned at the beginning, it came out just yesterday or today that the violence against the environment, this is one of the postulates that it will become considered as a sin. This was one of the proposals during the Synod. So we see how it is important to raise this awareness about the relationship between reality in which especially poor people live and the reality of faith. Before I leave you floor for some questions, I would like to ask if it is possible. What interests me personally is the relationship between three popes, because if we can understand why John Paul II, who came from my cultural political background, has some kind of mistrust toward Theologia de la Liberación, and Benedict XVI, who came from your cultural background, also had some kind of mistrust. Now Pope Francis has quite radically different approach. How would you reconcile that?
That the Church is in evolution and growing. But I would not make it as simple as this. First of all, I would say we have to acknowledge the historical dimension of the pontificate of St. John Paul II. And there is no doubt that he contributed to the peaceful end of the Cold War. Second, liberation theology in this ideological battlefield where United States also were involved in the Cold War was, in my opinion, unjustly identified with Marxism and communism. You have to consider liberation theology not as one single theology, it's a whole family of theologies. And you had a few branches which were radical, for example, identified with Brazilian theologian Assmann, but the mainstream was Gutierrez, Juan Luis II, and Iaculia, later on Jon Sobrino, Leonardo Boff. They were in the realm of the social doctrine of the Church. But John Paul II, coming from Poland, he knew what communist totalitarian is, and he had this idea. This theology is identified with Marxism, and so he said, just stop, and we have to pay attention. Another story is Josef Ratzinger. He was in some way traumatized by the student revolution in 1968, also associated with socialism and communism. And that's why he identified liberation theology with Marxism. This could be a theme, of course, for a whole conference, but just to show you in the case of John Paul II that already during his lifetime there was a change. The first meeting he had with Archbishop Oscar Romero didn't go well. And Romero went out quite disappointed, and a friend even tells that he was crying. And there was a second meeting in January 1980 3 months before the assassination of Romero, and this was different. He felt encouraged by John Paul II, and it seems John Paul II got a more balanced information about the situation in El Salvador. And I know personally from Cardinal Casper that in 2000, when they were preparing the big commemoration of the martyrs of the 20th century in Rome, in the Colosseum, Casper was in charge of preparing this celebration. And he went to see Pope John Paul II. He said, that's what we have prepared. And he said, and the Pope only had one concern. He said, where do you mention Oscar Romero? And Casper said, we didn't plan this. And he said, the Pope went through the papers and he said, here we shall mention by name Oscar Romero. So, yeah, there is a change, there is evolution, and it would be my short and too short answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Please, your questions.
Professor Maya, I have issues. One is that whether you have heard of the economy in El Salvador. Mainly, I think the problem was corruption on the authority and the poverty and the low. So have you heard of? Because I have seen some insider report. I don't want to mention which TV. It's Middle East, you know. The report has said illegal fishing in the Central America, especially El Salvador, very serious for the shark fin, killing a lot of sharks, and then secretly smuggled to Taiwan, to Kaohsiung, you know, maybe the Taipei Ricci, you know. So it's very serious because I think Greenpeace, they didn't like this kind of, and Pope Francis also didn't like this. It happened in El Salvador, but it's very secret. If you got killed if you because it was a big business. And the second issue is that it may bring to another MRI topic next time. Is about East Timor. I think it's more or less the murder and sainthood of Oscar Romero, more or less like the Indonesian killing in the East Timor of the Catholics, Portuguese Catholic in East Timor, and then it also happened to the history of Macau, because 20 years ago the last governor, General Vieira, has maybe ordered from Portugal to have some refugees from East Timor in stay in Macau. They let them stay here. Maybe the Portuguese priests here, they know this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions, and thank you very much also for building a bridge between El Salvador and East Timor and Macau. We live in a globalized world, and things are connected, of course. We live in an economically globalized world, and you have been pointing also to these connections. You have been mentioning the keyword of corruption. That is a major issue in El Salvador, of course. And you also have been pointing to Pope Francis, to his encyclical Laudato Si, and the central message of Laudato Si is precisely that we have to listen to the cry of the poor and to the cry of the earth. And there is a connection by overfishing the oceans and by destroying the natural surrounding. And this is, of course, a global challenge. The global warming is touching the whole planet. And so the challenge is to tackle it also on a global level. I'm not very familiar with the situation in East Timor. I only can mention that I know about a German Jesuit who came to Indonesia and East Timor, who was assassinated, who became a martyr, Father Ernst Albrecht. Yes. And let's also be aware that in some way the Salvadorian martyrs not only are representatives of many martyrs in El Salvador, but that's a global phenomenon. John Paul II, in 1983, he published Apostolic Exhortation Divinus Magister, where he speaks about martyrdom in today's world. And he says probably today we have more Christians persecuted and murdered than in the early centuries.
Fernando.
Thank you, Martin, for your excellent presentation. Very many, a lot of memories in my heart and in my mind. I would like to ask, because you spent quite a lot of time talking about universities. No? So I have two questions. What do you think has been the impact of the example of the UCA in other universities in the world? Have they changed the way, not only Jesuit universities, I would say, in a broader way? Have the universities, such an important institution in today's world, have they changed their self-understanding of what should be the knowledge they produce, for whom and from whom, their role in their society? And the second question is about theologians, because you also spend a lot of time talking about theologians. What has been the impact of this group of theologians in the theology of today? You see less and less, and you hear less and less the voice of theologians in today's world, talking about the world. So, what do you think are the impacts in the universities and in theology?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fernando, for these important questions. There is an impact, no doubt, on Jesuit universities and even on other universities. At least in the sense that they feel challenged and they feel in a different way, I would say, about the social responsibility of universities. Iaculia spoke in Spanish about la proyección social of the university, the incidence of university in the social reality. And this is also reflected in major speeches of our last superior generals. Peter Hans Kolkenbach gave a speech on the role, the task of the university in today's world, referring to Ignacio Iaculia, and in a similar way also Adolfo Nicolas. Of course, you could also ask where concretely does this become a reality? Yeah, I think that it has an impact, and I will talk in Innsbruck in November, and I will address the University of Innsbruck in commemoration of Iaculia and also Segundo Monte's study. And I will try to challenge also the universities in Europe in this sense. Where does the question of migration and refugees appear in your curriculum? Where does the major challenge of our time, climate change and dangerous global warming, impact on your research? And yeah, I would answer in this direction. And the second question, the impact on theology. Yeah, of course, these martyrs in some way also are martyrs of the theology of liberation. And I would say they confirm that this theology is Jesuanico, would say Jon Sorino, that it's in the following of Jesus, and without idealizing liberation theology, it also needs corrections and growth and criticism. And in this sense, I wouldn't say that everything that Cardinal Ratzinger was questioning in liberation theology should just be thrown aside. But in its core, I think it's really a theology which brings us to the heart of Christian faith, which brings us to the cross and resurrection.
Thank you. We have time for one more question before we go for break.
In this line, I will be furthermore to question what, or the point you present, science and faith, and in the context of social issues. And I enjoy this aspect because even I must say, if I am allowed to mention Father Yves Camus, by the fact of several times in our conversations to come to this point, not only the question of social issues, to go to, in a scientific way, the story of, you say, the statistics, you joke a little bit, someone saying, present the statistics, the objective reality. So my point is, how much we should go much more in a scientific approach to the social issues, and coming back with my companion Yves, saying how many times we are talking about economics. And I remember Lonergan, the latest works done by Lonergan, an excellent thinker, was coming to economics, because in our world we come to see the corruption and moral destruction of the economical fields, and we can see the profit comes to be the greatest value instead of the humans. So once again, are we going, especially when you are talking university environment, what are you doing to go to the root of the problems? Like the social issue, in this case, very nice to hear how we apply science with a great sense of mission. And nowadays, we are also talking about so many meetings, and the corruption and the lack of morality in the finances and the economy, and what we are doing.
Yeah, I would say, give at the end the answer to the questions you have been raising. I very much agree that a scientific and analytical, a structural approach is needed. And this is also part of the method of liberation theology, what Claude Obispoff called a social analytical mediation, to tackle the structures. For me, very enlightening is something from Archbishop Helder Câmara in Brazil. He once said, if I give bread to the poor, everybody says, a wonderful bishop. And he says, when I ask the question, why are there so many people suffering from hunger, they immediately call me a communist. So this marks the difference between caritas and the social analytical approach. And for this, science is needed. You have to ask the question, why are things as they are? And you have been pointing to economy, of course. There is a famous social ethicist among the German Jesuits, Oswald von Breuning, and he once said in a provocative way, we are only small people on the shoulders of Karl Marx. We have to recognize also what on the field of the analysis of economical mechanisms, Marx is right. And in today's world, with the gap between rich and poor becoming wider and wider, and the accumulation of richness becoming bigger and bigger. I think in some way we also have to go back to Marx and recognize where he was right. Not in his ideology, not in his dialectical materialism, but in his analysis of the economic and the social mechanisms. And at the end, you have been pointing to corruption. This became clear to me in the 30 years I'm now living partly in El Salvador. I did part of my Jesuit training also in India, and I know other countries that the root of the illness is corruption, and this goes also to the individuals. This goes to the individual sinfulness. And for me, Pope Francis is prophetic also in this sense if he formulates provocative things like, this economy kills. We have to go to the systemic courses. We have to change the system. And this is, of course, a challenge for the universities. Iacuria once said, there must not be only a theology of liberation, there must be a psychology of liberation, a sociology of liberation, engineering of liberation. And this goes all over the faculties.
Thank you very much.